Okay, everybody. First and foremost, I miss all of you. I'm in LA right now and probably having a good old time getting a chance to meet my nephew for the first time. He was born basically right around the time when we all broke away into remote learning back in March. So it was really hard to get a chance to fly out and see him then. So we're finally getting a chance to do that as a family. So I do appreciate you letting me go and be a part of that. And I wanted to make sure that I took the time to still keep you all abreast of what we're looking at and still on track. So today we're getting into the Safavid Empire, which is a big part of our Gunpowder Empire's unit. Please look at the time period, 1501 to 1736. That's a significant run for an empire, especially an empire that's going to be uniquely challenged in the conflicts that they will fight throughout their region and realm. So we kick this off with a quick peek of where we are. From a geographic perspective, we are in the region today of Iraq, a little bit of the area of Iran, in fact, all of Iran, and a little bit of what is modern day Afghanistan and even Pakistan. To start things off, we get into the history here of what exactly is going on. And this empire, the Safavids, as you can see, will start technically with a group of individuals known as the Sufi. And we'll talk about them a little bit later in this unit. And the Sufi religious order will officially be recognized as the Safaviya, which will eventually become the Safavid Empire. Now, we kind of dig in some older stuff from Unit 1 and 2. The Mongol Empire is still a situation for time. And as we remember, the extent of the Mongol Empire reached all the way from East Asia to Persia. So we do recognize Mongols having an influence here. We'll talk about that and address it here in a short little bit. But after the Mongols, we appreciate that there will be a period where a brief empire known as the Timurids will emerge, and thus we will see the expansion into what is today Persia or Iran. Technically, this area was extremely wealthy. It was at the time sort of the end of the Silk Roads before it transitioned into the Trans-Saharan trade route. So we do appreciate that this area had an enormous amount of wealth, a lot of influence politically and economically, and even socially in the region. However, this area is extremely divided, as we're about to look at, and that division makes things very, very palpable, especially again for economics and government. But that said, this area will see unity and become the Safavid Empire under who I think you should probably put a star beside, King Ismail I, who is a brilliant individual who will be very akin to studying the academics and learning from the scholars of your Baghdad House of Wisdom, for example, a major beneficiary to a lot of knowledge and the growth of educational practices in the area. So using those big brain skills, we're going to see a lot of unity happening here under this Safavid Empire. But what creates the line in the sand, so to speak, which is a horrible pun, is the faith of Islam itself. And thus we see the Safavids emerging as a critically Shia Islamic empire, which we haven't addressed since the beginning of the school year. So, quick heads up, I am going to take the time to explain again the difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims. This difference is still very much felt in the Islamic world today. So I just want to make sure that you understand that this is what we are examining. It would take a lot of time to really coordinate all the understandings of the split, but this is going to be a quick and sort of right between the eyes example. So what makes the difference? So we mentioned here that the Safavids are a Shia empire. Shia Muslims believe that they are practicing Islam the specific critical way as intended by the Prophet Muhammad and Allah. What makes the split is that Shia Muslims are very much focused on their perspective of who should be the next rightful leader of the Islamic world after the Prophet Muhammad. And they argue that the person in charge needed to be of official blood to the Prophet Muhammad, which instantly brings us into some unique perspectives. Remember that we see some unique gender differences between males and females in the Islamic community. Now, the Prophet Muhammad did have a daughter, but he did not have a son. And so instantly there is this unique perspective of, could the daughter be the next leader of the Islamic community? However, she did get married, and thus the son-in-law would be tapped to be the next rightful leader by the Shia community to lead Islam, or all Muslims. All right. On the other side, we have Sunni Muslims who argue because there is no official blood heir, no male blood heir to the Prophet Muhammad, and because it is a son-in-law, this son-in-law is not of blood of the Prophet Muhammad. He married the blood of the Prophet Muhammad, and therefore Sunni Muslims are more keen on the idea that the leader of the people of Islam should be someone who is a highly elevated individual in the community, a very devout and very well-trusted Muslim. So therefore you can see what causes the split. It is the rightful leadership of the Islamic people. In the end, today we again see that Shia Muslims argue they again are practicing Islam the pure way. I kind of make this as a connection point for the previous units that we've looked at. We think of Ibn Battuta kind of scrutinizing and looking down upon other Muslims, like in Africa, who merged Islam with their local traditional customs. Here we see Sunni and Shia Muslims looking down upon one another for not necessarily practicing Islam the same rightful way as they do. So again, just see this kind of unique connection point. As far as the impact of the Safavid Empire on the region, one thing that I really want to make sure that we see here is the amount of conflict that does take place. However, as the Mongols were really encroaching and pushing into this region of Persia, both Shia and Sunni Muslims set aside their differences and would actually fight together to repel, or at least try to repel, the engaging Mongol hordes. Now, even though, again, we know that there's a lot of bloodshed, a lot of military skirmishes here, and even though we see Shia and Sunni Muslims fighting together, there is still some difference. And when the Mongols eventually are pushed back and recede, Sunni and Shia Muslims go back to fighting one another. All right, so we see here the Safavid Empire, again, basically just working together with the other Sunni empires in the region, and then when the threat is gone, they go back to fighting one another. Ultimately, the Safavid Empire will push all people within itself to convert to Islam in Shia practice. Right? Non-Muslims could still continue to live in the region as long as they paid an official tax, which we'll talk about later in this unit. But the key thing is what they are effectively building is what we know today as Iran, which is still today the heartland of Shia Muslims in the world, with over 34% of the total population of Muslims living here, practicing this faith. Surrounding it, of course, will be areas that practice Sunni Islam, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, or even Yemen. All right. As far as we look into the conflict, the key group that will go head-to-head with the Safavids will be simply known as the Turkish Ottomans. Now, technically, we've already addressed who the Turks were earlier when we were examining the Crusades. We'll talk about that here in a second. Turkish Ottomans will be Sunni, and they will fight against the Safavids, these Persian Muslims, in a series of conflicts off and on again throughout the decades, throughout the centuries. The bottom line that you need to simply look at for this time period is just the fact that despite all the conflict going on, these are still Muslims, and Muslims are still very keen on expanding the faith of Islam. And so we will continue to see a very rapid expansion of the religion, even though conflict is taking place. Now, bringing back in sort of the Crusades, we know the Crusades had been going on. We know that Christians had been taking on the Turks. Because Christians and Turks fight all the time during this time period, we notice a unique alliance being formed. Right? As we are going to look next week, Ottomans were very hungry to push into Europe and will even convert European boys to fight for them against the Safavids. Because of this, we see Christians, and especially Armenian Christians, working together with the Safavids to promote a unique alliance between Christianity and Shia Islam, even to the point where they do trade, they do business, they support one another, they even defend each other. In fact, some local communities, like you can see the Jewish community, for example, or other Sunni groups, will not be as tolerated or appreciated as Christians would be. So we do see sort of a unique moment of peace here between Christians from Western Europe, and of course the Safavids, because in a weird way, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. As far as trade is concerned, we do see a major influence of Persian art, which keeps alive a lot of Islamic and Arab art through business. The Safavids will continue to push for the establishment of Silk Road business, even to the point where they open up these unique sort of hotels called caravanserai, which we'll look at later in this unit as well. Amongst these little hotel communities, not like an Airbnb per se, but just a really nice residential palace that travelers could check in and stay overnight or, upwards of weeks and months. Caravanserai were really heavily pushed by the Safavids to continue to instigate trade, even if it was doing business with people the Safavids didn't really favor. In the grand scheme, as long as resources and money are moving, conflict should stay low. But we started to notice a major shift, and this is where that whole Christian and Safavid alliance sort of starts to wane and slightly disappear here. Europeans by this time period are mastering the ability of global maritime trade. And with the expansion of Europeans who are very, very keen on getting to India and China, or the Indies, we notice that trade on the Silk Road starts to weaken. So it is this slide that I would probably say put 3 stars with. We see a weakening of Silk Road business. Chinese merchants, Indian merchants, they're all heavily working in their ports. They're not really heavily focusing on trading on the Silk Roads anymore, which suddenly puts the Safavid Empire at a disadvantage. No longer are numerous numbers of travelers going back and forth on the Silk Roads. The idea of relay trade is not as significant. Therefore, we start to see less and less money and resources moving through the Safavid Empire. So as a result, we're going to see that Silk Road business is rapidly going to decline. Now, there will still be business going on the Silk Roads. Many of those trade routes will still foster a huge amount of money through the expansion of Islamic art, which we again will talk about in a later topic in this unit. In the end, we will recognize that the Safavid Empire will fall largely due to a kind of greedy approach. A lot of their leadership will start to move more towards business and just making a lot of money, which, as we can definitely appreciate, can cause some high yields of distrust and disloyalty in the leadership if you're taxing your people and you're not really giving access to all goods to the people. What will eventually happen is this whole area of Persia and the Safavids will be chipped away at by other external groups, largely, again, the Ottomans, and we will start to see this disunity really cave in with some major gunpowder conflicts, which we'll look at, as mentioned, in a later topic. But with that being said, that is it for the pre-recorded notes for today. Again, I miss you all terribly. I hope you're doing well. Please find some time for yourselves and your family and friends, and I will greatly look forward to seeing you guys when I get back home next week. Have a good day.